Hey, what's going on? Pumpkins, it's SGZ here from the SpartanGameZone, and in this video we'll be showcasing the original Borderlands 3 meta in all its glory, as we find out how the original best legendary weapons perform in today's Borderlands 3. I scoured the internet, my memory banks, and your feedback to find the original 4 legendary weapons that filled the slots of the most damaging builds within the first month of Borderlands 3. They were all nerfed early on, and 3/4 of them were specifically targeted. I'll be testing them out against bosses and groups of mobs so we can see just how far they've come or how far they've fallen. And if there's another meta at a different point in time you want to see showcased, let me know in the comments, and let's crack into it. First up, the Call Pistols, which can only be dropped from Tyreen the Destroyer you fight in Destroyer's Rift. They come in Kings and Queens versions, which are functionally identical except for the elements they can come in. The Call Pistols dominated at launch, especially if you ran as Flakker, and they had every right to. They could only be obtained by defeating the game's final boss, which was pretty much the hardest challenge back then, and the reward for essentially completing the game should be good, and it was. They highlighted Jacob's craftsmanship in all its glory, enhanced by their elemental nature, ability to deal splash damage, and ability to heal the wielder. Landing crits would go beyond the standard ricochet effect, returning bullets to your magazine and spawning 3 projectiles which would fly into the air before dive bombing the initial target. They were so good that they were actually the first weapons to get nerfed, a special hotfix just for them, and some other non-weapon related stuff saw their fire rate reduced from 10.5 to just 3 and a bit. Even having sustained that early nerf, they still rock nowadays, having had their damage doubled on 2 separate occasions. Their high dependency to land criticals is still there, but overall this pair came out of the balance wars relatively unscathed, which is a great effort, especially for the first nerf. Moving on now to the Cutsman, a SMG that can only come in the original elements, Fire, Shock and Corrosive, and has an increased chance to drop from Borman nades around here in the Meridian outskirts. The Cutsman was the original top class SMG, even surviving its early nerf, which the Crossroad didn't, to become the weapon of choice when tackling the Takedown and even beyond that. It was the gun for all classes, for all situations, and as far as launch weapons go, it probably had the longest run in the meta out of all of them. It's sad to say though, but that time has long since gone. Trying out this gun, I kept looking at my build wondering what has happened here. Why am I not dealing any damage? Well, it turns out nothing has happened, and that's why. It appeared in the first weapon adjustment pass on October 17th, getting its damage nerfed by 25%, and it did get 20% of that back later. But when you think about all the buffs we've had and how many new weapons have been introduced, like the DNA Kaiserworth and Plasma Coil, it becomes clear why this gun no longer performs. The goalposts have moved a long way. You're essentially using the base game Cutsman on Mayhem 10 enemies, and it's crazy that this once powerhouse weapon barely holds its own in the end game anymore. You can still crit swap kill Grave Ward like the good old days, but it's just not the same, and it kinda makes me wanna cry. I mean, lie and say it's good, but it's not. Up next is the Flakker, a Torg shotgun that comes in non-elemental incendiary and radiation elements, and has an increased chance to drop from Manvark around here in Conrad's Hold. At launch, the Flakker was the most overpowered gun in the game, and that all resulted from Gearbox not expecting the gun to perform as it did. It was too accurate, they didn't expect all those explosions to actually hit stuff, so it was nerfed alongside the Cutsman, where its damage was cut by a third. It went through more changes than any other gun on this list, initially consuming 5 ammo per shot with a 16 round magazine, then getting its mag size reduced to 1 and using all of it per shot, and now we're somewhere in between with the big mag from launch and the ammo consumption of the first nerf, along with 17% more damage and a 23% faster fire rate than its launch version. The Flakker holds up pretty well today. It's great on modes when mobbing. Her splash damage abilities allow you to rip through mobs like in the before times. It's closer to the original than the others on this list. At launch we weren't able to one-shot bosses, it took effort, and the Flakker maintains that level of performance, although on Zane, I could one-shot General Traun, so post-launch shenanigans can be achieved. Like the Cutsman, it has been leapfrogged by a number of shotguns, but there is still a faint glimmer of its old self. Rounding up this showcase of the original meta in today's Borderlands 3 is the Lyuda, a Vlados sniper rifle, which can come in all the elements and has an increased chance to drop from Tremendous Rex, the final boss of the Cistern of Slaughter. The Lyuda was a top tier sniper rifle in Borderlands 2 and it started where it left off in Borderlands 3. The reason why it was so strong at launch was because it was bugged. Its unique effect wasn't behaving as it should. It fires a single projectile that splits off into 3 after travelling a short distance. However, once the projectile split, the original would stay along for the ride, resulting in 25% more damage than intended. That was addressed in the first round of adjustments, along with a 30% reduction in critical damage. Since its initial stint on top, the Lyuda has struggled to maintain that form. Its DPS is still high, but like similar styled sniper rifles, it struggles with ammo, and when you have the Sandhawk which does its job better, it's not really worth the struggle. Turns out it was just keeping that #1 sniper rifle spot warm for what was to come next. Running with these guns during a normal Maliwan takedown is definitely still possible, and that's one of the great things about this game. I took these weapons over to Midnight's Cairn off to see the Valkyrie squad and Wotan, and it was a blast. The Cutsman cutting down mobs as best it could, spamming Flakker rounds like there's no tomorrow. It was definitely nostalgia inducing and an enjoyable experiment. Although these 4 legendaries don't perform like others in their class despite being the best originally, you can still equip this loadout and do some work, although you will struggle amongst the game's tougher challenges. Even though the meta has shifted a lot and there are a number of weapons that sit above these now, that doesn't mean you can't have some fun with them and be successful at the same time. With the countless weapons that have been introduced and adjustments that have been made, it's great to see that the OGs can still do the job. And that's one of the highlights of Borderlands 3. So that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned of the original Borderlands 3 meta and how it performs 3 years later. If you did, consider dropping a like or subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one.